Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. Today we're continuing in our exploration of the 12 signs and wonders in Egypt. But before I dive in, I just wanted to remind you that my book, Being God's Image, Why Creation Still Matters, released this week. If you have a copy and you've had a chance to read it, it would be a huge help if you would post a review of it online, either on Amazon or Goodreads or Barnes & Noble or christianbook.com, wherever you look for reviews and wherever you buy books. Getting the word out in the first week or so of a book's release is so important. If you're tired of shallow biblical content and you want to see others engage more deeply in Scripture, spreading the word about this book is one way you can do that. So thank you for your help. All right, today we are continuing in our exploration of the sign of hail. We're going to finish the sign of hail today. It's been a long one because we're in cycle 3 and all the signs are longer and more intense. So I'll begin by reading from my own translation of the Hebrew, starting in Exodus chapter 9, verse 27. Pharaoh sent and called for Moses and Aaron, and he said to them, I have sinned this time. Yahweh is the righteous one, and I and my people are wicked. Pray to Yahweh, for the thunderings of God and hail has become too much. I will send you away, and you shall no longer stay. Moses said to him, When I have left the city, I will spread my palms to Yahweh. The thunderings will cease, and the hail will be no more, so that you may know that the land is Yahweh's. As for you and your servants, I know that you do not yet fear Yahweh God. Now the flax and the barley were struck, for the barley was ripe and the flax was budding. But the wheat and the emmer were not struck, for they are late ripening. Moses left the city where he was with Pharaoh, and he spread out his palms to Yahweh. The thunder and hail ceased, and rain was not poured on the land. When Pharaoh saw that the rain and hail and thunder had ceased, he sinned again by making his heart heavy, he and his servants. So the heart of Pharaoh was strong. He did not send away the Israelites, just as Yahweh had spoken by the hand of Moses. This is a remarkable admission on Pharaoh's part that he has sinned. This passage for today begins with his admission, I have sinned this time. What does Pharaoh mean by this? Well, in Egyptian thought, the ideal was to do the will of the gods. And so sin was not lining up with what the gods wanted you to do. So by acknowledging that he has sinned, Pharaoh is admitting that Yahweh really is a god. Not maybe the one true God in his mind, but at least that Yahweh is God and that his demands must be followed. So this is significant. In chapter 5, verse 16, the Hebrews had called their forced labor a sin, the fact that they were being forced to work. And now Pharaoh acknowledges his own lack of responsiveness as sin. Notice that he implicates others when he says, I and my people have sinned. He doesn't bear all of the blame himself. And by the end, we see that his servants are also being heavy-hearted against God. Pharaoh also acknowledges that the weather event that produced hail was a divine theophany. We touched on this possibility last week. Here he calls the thunder thunderings of God. He acknowledges that this was a divine disclosure, divine presence. God makes clear in his words through Moses that the land belongs to God. Pharaoh could not continue to lay claim to the land because it was Yahweh's. That is a significant development. And then we have this really interesting aside telling us about the agricultural calendar, the agricultural cycle. And this is a really fascinating clue, not only to when this sign would have taken place in the agricultural year, but also the kind of impact it would have had on Egyptian culture. I've had fun digging into this one, learning more. So flax and barley, their growth cycle overlaps in early February. So this particular sign would have taken place in early February. Flax is a tiny seed that can be pressed to make oil, or it can be boiled to eat. But in Egypt, the main thing that flax was used for was making clothing. Linen is made from flax, and so for God to send hail that destroyed the crop of flax would have made a devastating effect on the clothing of the Egyptians. They would have had to wear their clothes another season and not replace them. This, of course, is not devastating to the same degree that death is, or even the removal of a food source, but it would have disrupted Egyptian culture and economy. Similarly with barley. Barley is a grain that you can eat. You've probably had barley soup before. Barley can be boiled in soup and it's a plump grain that gets softened when you boil it, and then it's kind of like rice. But the Egyptians mainly used barley. Sometimes they used it to make cheap bread, but mainly they used barley to make beer. So they would make a dough out of it. They would grind it into flour and make dough. They would partially bake the dough, and then they would crumble it into water and let the water ferment, and they would strain it, and that was their beer. Beer was a staple of the Egyptian diet, and it was drunk by all ages and all classes of society. So when the hail comes, it doesn't immediately devastate their food sources, but rather clothing and beer. So it's like God is starting with what is the least problematic to eliminate. He's not starving anybody at this point. There's still an implication that they could respond and avoid starvation. But if they refuse, then the same thing could happen and destroy the next crops of wheat and emmer. Emmer is a kind of a related, like a cousin of wheat, similar to spelt, if you've heard of that. Wheat was used to make bread, and so was emmer. It's lower in gluten, but it makes a nice nutty flavor of bread product. Those don't ripen until late March, so about 6 weeks after the hail, the locusts will then devastate the food supply. But again, this is a gentle warning moving in that direction. It's interesting to me that Moses heads out of the city, which would have been a danger zone with hail falling, but he goes out and stretches out his palms, which would be, again, dangerous in a hailstorm, but he trusts that Yahweh will protect him the way he's protected Goshen, where the Hebrews live. Here, Pharaoh not only fails to respond to Yahweh, but he fails to keep his own word. What he promises to do, he in fact does not do. And so that is a sad indictment of his own lack of integrity. It's not just that he's resisting God, he's also being very fickle and unreliable as a ruler. And so his actions condemn him. Next week, we'll begin on the sign of locusts. I hope you have a great week in the meantime, and don't forget to post those book reviews. Thank you.